Welcome to Game Changers with Molly Fletcher, where we take you behind the scenes with peak performers to learn what makes them tick and discover how you can apply their lessons to your life. I'm your host, Molly Fletcher. You may have seen today's guest featured in eye-catching headlines like From Hooters Girl to Running a Billion-Dollar Brand. Kat Cole is a dynamic leader, advisor, and investor in startups and avid humanitarian. She is group president at Focus Brands, the parent company to Cinnabon, Moe's, Schlotzsky's, Auntie Anne's, Carvel, McAllister's Deli, and Seattle's Best Coffee. At 17, Kat turned a job as a Hooters waitress into the start of an extraordinarily successful career in the food service industry. She joined Hooters' corporate office at age 20, and by 26, she was vice president of the company and one of the youngest executives in the industry. From there, she went on to become the president of Cinnabon at age 32 before taking on her current role at Focus Brands. Kat is a sought-after speaker on leadership development, brand building, and brand innovation, and was named one of Fortune magazine's 40 Under 40 honorees and to CNBC's next list of innovators, leaders, and disruptors. She is often quoted as saying, "Don't forget where you came from, and don't you dare let it solely define you." A mantra she still applies today to helping businesses embrace their roots while driving innovation and growth. On today's episode, Kat shares her advice to young leaders, how her life journey shaped her leadership, and what she learned about building brands. You can follow Kat on Twitter at @CatColeATL. Please join me in welcoming Kat Cole. All right, well, Kat, it is so fun to have you on. I can't tell you, I'm so excited to have you on. So you have, in my opinion, such a really unique story, and you had to grow up really fast when you were a kid, and you've shared that with me, privately, and we've talked about it. But tell, kind of the listeners a little bit about your younger life. I think it's really profound, particularly considering the success that you've had.
Yeah, the short version of a pretty interesting story is I grew up in Jacksonville, Florida. I'm the oldest of three girls, so I have two younger sisters, and was raised by an amazing mom who, when I was 9 years old, decided we needed to leave our family situation because my father was an alcoholic, and although a really sweet man, was a terrible husband and father for quite some time, and she was having to do it on her own anyway. So the challenge was she didn't really have the income or the support that showed a path to properly supporting us, but she had the courage and the fortitude to know that while leaving and being a single parent of three girls was scary and she wasn't sure how she was going to do it, the thought of staying and having us be in danger was far worse. And so we left, and my mom set us on a food budget of $10 a week for 3 years, and worked 3 jobs. And over time, as I got older, I started working at a young age, became, a hostess, worked in malls, became a hostess at Hooters, and then a Hooters girl to pay my way through college. And very quickly that turned into me opening franchises around the world at the age of 19, 20, 21, moved to Atlanta, took a corporate job at the age of 20, and the rest is kind of the career path. But that's sort of the summary of the background.
Well, and I remember once we were together and you said that you looked at your mom I think you were 9, and you kind of looked at her when she told you this, and you pretty confidently sort of said, "Yeah, okay, Mom." And what took you so long? Yeah. The lesson that I share a lot is that when she came to me and had to make this tough decision, and obviously very worried about what I would think and how we would respond, my response in my head and externally, when she said, "We're leaving, I'm divorcing your dad, and we're going to go out on our own, and I don't know what it's going to be like," my response was, "What took you so long?" And the lesson in that is that the people who are closest to the action, whether it's the employees in the front line, the players in a game, or the kids in a bad scenario, they know what the right thing to do is long before the leader does. The issue is people on the front lines either A, don't have the language to articulate the problem or even the solution, and they certainly don't have the authority. B, they don't have the control
to do something about it. And so the trick in life and business is to stay as close to the people who are as close to the action as you can, so you compress the amount of time between when they have the insights and the experience that would tell you what the right thing to do is to fix a problem or create or take advantage of an opportunity. You compress the amount of time between when they know and when you know. And as a leader, then you do have the language and you do have the authority, like my mom did, to do something about it.
God, that's awesome, the way you transition that story into the application of business. Obviously, that's so true. I couldn't agree with you more. And you said, right, at 19, after this experience with Hooters, you were opening franchises around the world. And I think the first assignment was like Australia, and you'd never been on a plane before. And so here you are at 19, getting on an airplane, opening this franchise in Australia, if I'm correct. And tell me, when you boarded that plane and you're sitting on this airplane at 19, never been on a plane before, going over to open a franchise, what was going through your head?
I think the reality was I was a 19-year-old that had never been on a plane. I had bought my first flight just before that to fly to Miami to get a passport. So I'd never been on a plane when they asked me. But when I got on the plane to go to Australia, it was my second flight because I bought a flight to go get my passport. I thought what any 19-year-old would think, that this is going to be freaking awesome. It was just, it's going to be life-changing. It's going to be exciting. I was at that time still looking at working at Hooters as a transitional job. And so it looked like I was just getting to do something very cool as a part of my transitional job while I was in college studying electrical engineering. I always thought that was sort of one step that would lead to many, many other places. And so I was more excited about it in the way any 19-year-old would be excited about it, and full of anticipation.
Sure. Well, and what a tribute that you said yes, right? I mean, a lot of kids may have said no, but you chose to say yes. What inside of you made you say yes, do you think?
I think there are two characteristics that drive people who seem to cut through the clutter and end up with more, whatever you want to call it, opportunity, success, trajectory. And on one hand, I was very curious. I was curious to know if I could do it. I was curious to figure out how they did things in other places. So this curiosity was incredibly strong and compelling. And the other piece was a bit of confidence that came from helping to raise my sisters, came from having to do a lot on my own, that no matter what I would run into that might be unfamiliar, I have confidence in my ability to build relationships. I have confidence in my ability to be curious. So this combination of both curiosity and confidence and humility and courage, those seemingly opposite characteristics, is sort of a theme throughout life and career that I've experienced. And so that was it. It's not it's not a magic formula. I had some confidence built by a great mom who believed in me, by taking a lot of risks, by having to grow up really fast. And I had a deep, deep curiosity and humility. And when you put those two things together, they're a pretty balanced approach, but they help you take thoughtful risks with a lot of hustle, but also put a lot of heart and a lot of thought into what gets done.
Sure. Wow. Well, with your journey through life, as you progressed and went over to Australia and opened these franchises, and all these different experiences you had that appear to be, particularly as you were being raised and as you transitioned and as you grew up so quickly, I would imagine have influenced you as a leader in business. And you've touched on it a little bit, but when you really think specifically about how your youth and your experiences at such a young age have influenced you as a leader, and even as your career has progressed, but you're still so young, how would you articulate that, of how it's influenced you as a business leader?
I do talk a lot about that influence, building this framework that I just mentioned, this concept of hustle and heart. On one side, having a ton of courage and confidence, two separate things but related. And on the other side, having deep curiosity and humility. And, being raised eating beanie weenies and potted meat, for people who don't know what that is, don't look up the ingredients, but being raised on sort of limited means, we weren't as bad off as many people are horribly in this country or around the world. And so we had a home, which was great, but it was tough for a long time, and toughest on my mom more than anyone. And so that builds humility, right? Because you look around and lots of people have nicer things than you, whether it's clothes or cars or houses or parties or whatever it is as you grow up as a child. So you learn this deep humility. We needed to lean on people for help. So that also builds humility, and that shows up in my leadership style and in work. But this crazy curiosity, because my mom wanted to get us out of the situation from which we were sort of growing up, and that built this big curiosity. What's next? What's out there? And to me, success was simply being somewhere tomorrow that I'm not today. It was about growth and learning, not money. My father actually had money. He had a white collar job. He had an office job, which was unlike anyone else in my family. And so my association with success was very decoupled from money, because I saw money and it wasn't good. And so that's just interesting. It's not necessarily something that everyone needs to have. But if you think about the fact that I had a father that had a good job, but a family situation that was bad, my correlation of money wasn't necessarily positive. So I had a different definition of success, which was learning, growing, quote, getting out of there, end quote, being anywhere different. And so that was incredibly formative. Also taking on responsibility at a young age to help my mom with my sisters, but watching the decisions my mom made and how she made those tough decisions and still stayed so positive. She really never spoke ill of our father. So she had this grace and this positivity, even though she was having to make tough decisions. And so that was my example of a leader when I was growing up. And so for all of us, we sort of connect ourselves to the examples we see, to the role models we see. And that literally set the bar for what women should look like in the world and for what leaders look like in the world. And that's a pretty high bar just to start off.
And how special it was your mom. Yeah. I mean, I think that's the coolest thing ever.
Oh, she's just, incredible. So I saw that hustle and those characteristics of humility and curiosity, courage and confidence, formed very much by the early years, show up in the way I approach business, investments, learning, my personal life, and certainly how I train and develop other leaders.
Wow. Well, they're special. The people that get to be led by you, I know, I'm sure are incredibly grateful, because that's a unique journey for them. And, just speaking of women and amazing women, I remember you spoke at LeaderCast last year, and you shared a story about attending the Women's Food Service Forum, which we both had the opportunity to be a part of, early on in your career. And you were blown away when you saw so many successful female executives in one room, and how it broadened your perspective. Tell me about how important that was to you, how it maybe influences the way you support other women in the work world, the way you maybe lead other women. It sounded as if it was a really powerful moment for you.
Yeah. I think growing up the way I did, I saw the typical mix of gender in the workplace, and I was working in restaurants, so I wasn't in a lot of office environments. So I had a kind of a delusional and prototypical view of what business leaders look like, which was basically a bunch of dudes in ties. And I'm new in the business world. I'm now 24 years old. I'm leading a small team in the corporate office at Hooters in Atlanta. And I go to the Women's Food Service Conference, and I walk into this room and I see 3,000 women in suits. Mostly women, not all, but mostly. And it was profound in that single moment, without anyone having to tell me anything, without having to read a book or see a PowerPoint, my entire belief system of what was possible for me was reframed, because I don't know who all these women are, but they're all in suits, and they probably all came from pretty different places. And it probably means that if they can do it, I can too. And it just reframed what was possible for me. And that taught me immediately, and it was weird. I had an out-of-body experience that I was realizing how profound it was in the moment, while benefiting from it. And it taught me the concept of the power of knowing what's possible, the power of possible. And so it shows up now as I remember that the human brain literally lights up and connects more when the messages it receives come from people that look like them, like us. And so I am more likely to believe a message and believe it is possible for me if there are other humans like me. How much like me are they? Are they in my age group? Are they women? Are they my race and ethnicity? Do they come from a similar background or not? And so what that means is I've learned that when we do panels at the company or in the industry, when I think about talking to customers or employees, making sure that whoever is sending the messages, when at all possible, is a mirror reflection of who the audience is. So if I've got mixed age, mixed race, mixed background audience, I need leaders and panels and communicators that are the same mix. And so my employees that might have sort of a higher development level on the academic side, I want to make sure I've got a really academic communicator to connect with them, because they'll get it and they'll relate. And those who came from more humble beginnings like me, I want to make sure that there are leaders that connect there. So this concept of remembering it's this message behind the message. You know, there's a message being communicated, but there's a secondary and more powerful message, which is how real does it feel for me based on how much I believe I connect with you who's communicating. And I connected more with my potential future because I saw people that were more like me. I didn't have to cover that gap. I didn't have to say, wow, there's a bunch of old dudes in the room and maybe I could be that one day. I wonder how. That gap was shortened because I saw more examples that were possibly a little closer to me, and that emboldened my belief systems and my courage and my confidence. And so that has affected how I believe that we should lead as a company, how I should lead as a person, making sure I'm getting diverse perspectives and remembering the power of women in leadership, not just in industries and in general as role models, but within our own company.
Well, and I think what's so cool about that is it was a moment. I mean, it was literally a moment in which everything changed for you, where you saw what you saw with 3,000 amazing, strong women in business suits, right, that you'd not seen before. And it changed, it sounds like, in many ways, probably it unlocked another level and a direction inside of you that has led to tremendous success. So it's a really special moment. And so, you know, speaking of that, you were the president of Cinnabon at 32, which is unbelievable. And, you know, so what advice would you give other young leaders? You know, because you were a young leader of a big brand.
Yeah.
And so what advice would you give young people that are listening?
You know, it's funny. So I became vice president of Hooters at 26 when we were doing $800 million in revenue, and then stayed there until I was 32, and then became president of Cinnabon at 32. And then stayed there and helped turn around that brand for 4.5 years before I moved up within the parent company and took on more responsibility. And, you know, all of that is interesting in that I was typically one of the few, if not only females, and call it the boardroom, you know, or the C-suite. And certainly I was drastically younger. My age difference was almost as apparent as my gender difference. And so that's just interesting. It taught me a lot of lessons. You know, one, I find that people who are young leaders sometimes make the fact that they're young more of an issue in their heads than it is to other people. And so it's sometimes when I talk to young leaders and they'll say, you know, but I'm so young and no one respects me because I'm so young. And I'm like, stop acting like an 18-year-old in the boardroom and you might elevate the level of respect you get.
Sure.
So, you know, I think on one hand, my advice to young leaders is make sure you're not doing anything that, yes, you're young, but you're also an executive. And so you don't get special rules because you're 20 years younger. You have to operate at the same level of excellence as people who've maybe been doing it a little longer. And so hold yourself to that standard and stop whining. That's one.
Nice. Nice.
The other piece of advice, though, is that remember that being young, or said another way, representing a different generation meaningfully is a strength. And bringing the perspective of yourself as a consumer or as a user, your peer group, helping a generationally diverse leadership team be more progressive and bringing that way of living to work in a way that educates and elevates the company. Don't forget that either. You know, so on one hand, don't be a baby and don't whine and hold yourself to a really high standard. Just because you got to a role faster doesn't mean you're not expected to be just as, if not more, proficient. On the other hand, don't forget to be very confident about the things that should allow you to add value, especially when you represent the employee base or your target consumer.
And so, you know, and I can sort of take a shot at what I think your answer might be to this, but I'd love for you to speak to it. You know, because you progressed through your career so quickly and so effectively and so efficiently and with such humility and confidence, I'm sure that like anybody, as they grow and evolve in their lives, they get doubters, they get naysayers. What was the story that you told yourself inside of those moments when that would happen? And how did you sort of flip that so that you could continue to sort of progress and become another better version of yourself the next day?
I think for me, I always remember advice I got from a franchisee in Argentina when I was opening restaurants down there. He was just this really interesting business person that had great philosophies. And he said to me one day, we were having all kinds of problems opening the restaurant, and the consumers were criticizing us. The parents of the employees were criticizing us. It was equipment wasn't working. It was a tough opening to begin with. And he said, a rule I've learned is that anytime you get criticized, assume for a moment that the criticism is accurate. He said, just let that be your first thought. And what that will do is it will either A, allow you not to put your foot in your mouth and demonstrate a level of humility that will help you grow past what is you've determined is possibly accurate criticism, or B, if you think about it, you consider it's accurate and then you still decide it's not, instead of debating the criticism or the naysayers, if you will, you end up focusing more on the why. And that's far more mature, thinking about getting to what might be driving someone to criticize or naysay or not believe. And so that was really great advice. And I really took it in and allowed it to color my thinking. And so as I moved up in my career, certainly there were people who would say, what is she doing here? She's, I've been in business longer than she's been alive. That's literally a quote I've heard. And so on one hand, the first thing I thought was, are they right? And so what is accurate about some of the naysayers as I was young and in big executive roles is that they were in business longer than I'd been alive. Fact. Super fact.
Right.
So what does that mean, though? And what it means is they probably have earned some scar tissue and some stripes that I haven't. It doesn't mean I haven't earned my right to be there. So that was my self-talk, which is, it doesn't mean I don't deserve to be here, but it does mean I should have the curiosity and the humility to learn from what they have. But I've also learned to not just have so much humility that you end up what they would call falling in line, just being happy to be there, having the seat but not using your voice and not adding value so you please people and don't make waves and don't ruffle feathers. And younger leaders who have an over-indexing of humility, which I did, tend to make that mistake. So my self-talk was, I deserve to be here. There are many smart people who put their name on me to be here, and not doing my part would be slapping them in the face.
Nice.
That's the other thing. It's not as if I self-nominated and I just get these executive positions. It's really smart people that believed in me who I owe giving the best that I've got, which may mean respectfully ruffling feathers. So that was a little bit of the self-talk. Assume the criticism might be accurate. Are there any things I'm doing that are a distraction, that I'm behaving as someone who's new in the role or who's young or unsophisticated or inexperienced? Maybe I am demonstrating some of those behaviors and maybe I should stop so it's not distracting from the very good things that I have to offer. And on the other hand, I would think the only way I honor those who put me here is busting my ass, being incredibly curious and humble, but using this seat to have a voice instead of just sitting in it and blocking it from someone who might be a stronger performer.
Oh, that's awesome. I love it. It's one of the things we talk about a lot is sort of shifting from, defensiveness in that moment to curiosity. Yeah. And to me, that's such a profound thing to do. And through that process, we can learn so much.
That's right.
Which is awesome. How would you describe the culture at Focus Brands? I mean, you are a part of creating it now, obviously, and have been for years. How would you describe it?
I would say there are distinct brand cultures at each of the brands. So we grow through acquisition. So we bought Moe's, we bought Cinnabon. These businesses have varying degrees of legacy tenure. They have their own unique cultures that are described in very different ways. Of course, they're in the hospitality business, so they have some common themes, like treating people with respect and values-oriented and service-minded and focusing on quality. They've got some common themes, but when you get past the basic sort of foundational principles of a good hospitality, food service, food consumer business, they get onto their own unique cultures. Moe's is a little edgy and high energy and focused on very progressive ingredient sourcing, and Cinnabon's warm and comforting and super indulgent. And the culture reflects that. It's a more warm and comforting and sweet and almost a bit feminine of a culture, whereas Moe's is in the other direction. So they all have their very distinct cultures. And then Focus has some umbrella or overarching cultural dynamics that unite them. So how we focus on investing in our partnerships, that would be franchisees, licensees, key partners. There's this big culture to remembering we structure our business through partnerships. We're not a corporately owned, edgy entity that's just plowing a bunch of capital into growing brick and mortar. We grow through franchising. So the culture is one of service to our partners. The other piece of the culture is mixing legacy knowledge, multi-generational leadership with really young, super progressive leaders and concepts and positioning. And so that creates tension because different generations, different points of view are different, but it also creates the best possible results. So we restructured our company several years ago, got a new headquarters, all to drive collaboration and innovation. Big corporate words, but when you get in the building, you see it, you feel it. People are talking, connecting. And so this concept of moving fast, a culture of speed, a culture of listening to the consumer, being like deeply, deeply rooted to the customer's experience, and then sharing those in appropriate ways across the business units and the brand so we can advance, it would describe some of the big focus cultural principles.
And how do you, which is, it's neat to hear you speak to it. And you said innovation, and I know that there are companies all over the place and folks listening that want to continue to innovate and evolve, and it's a part of the organizations they're inside of, and they want to lead it at some level, certainly too. How do you and Focus stay innovative?
Part of the ways we stay innovative is, one, making sure we're disrupting ourselves. So you're going to get disrupted if you don't disrupt yourself. So what does that look like? It looks like creating your own artificial crisis. So instead of waiting for a real crisis to happen, internally we're good at modeling what a little crisis might look like. A food safety crisis, a competitor crisis, a brand health crisis, a real estate crisis, an economic crisis, whatever that is. We build the muscle that would typically only get formed if you had to deal with chaos. We try to advance that chaos.
So you literally sort of create these situations and then have to execute inside of them. You create them.
It's part of it is forecasting what might happen, making it pretty real. Just as you would on the athletic side, if you're saying, look, there are some teams that have this type of defense and we're not strong enough. So let's set up some scrimmages. Let's set up some mock interactions where we sort of play against the team like that. So when we actually do, it's not the first time we've done it, and we're thoughtful and we have a game plan. So that's one. The other is we're getting better at having incubation teams, or what in the tech world we call sprint teams, where you recognize that your company is built with a certain machine, a certain set of processes, and it's what's gotten you to where you are. But in order for new little seeds to sprout, they need to kind of be planted in their own little special soil and protected from the big machine that maybe has become slower or more bureaucratic, or there are more opinions. Because new things often, it's funny, you see in any company, new things will get killed internally before they ever have a chance to win or get killed externally with the real consumer. And so building a culture where ideas bubble up, building a culture where there isn't pettiness, there isn't pride of authorship in a negative way, but rather pride of accomplishment as a team. So it doesn't matter who brings up a great point, it gets bubbled up if it's meaningful. And then if there are big, what we call these little micro wars or micro battles, little things where we need to have quick, small wins in order to bridge us to a bigger goal, we don't let people sit around and get stuck in the mud of talking about the big giant strategy or the 10-year plan. You need the strategy, you need the 10-year plan, but if you just sit around and think about that all day, you're never going to get there. So you put that up there and say, here's where we want to get. What are the things we would have to do, halfway there, and then maybe halfway between there and where we are, and you sort of get back to, we can travel miles by fast feet instead of sitting around trying to figure out how we jump miles.
Right. Oh, I like that analogy. How as a leader, how do you coach people around you who are adverse to change or adverse to some of the innovative strategies that are happening internally?
It just depends on where those people are. Everyone comes at change with very different views. Some are resistant to change because they have been through similar change and it went poorly. And so their point of view is well earned. Some of them are just simply afraid of the unknown, and even though they might complain about the present, the future is more frightening. And then there are others who resist it because they genuinely believe that they are protecting the company's interest. So there's a combination of approaches to bringing change-resistant people forward to being more open to change and then engaged with change and then advocates of change. It's this journey. And so the first transitional phase is a combination of logic and emotion. It's typically on a foundation of logic, which is, you present the business case confronting reality of, if we don't do anything different than we're doing now, here's the path we're on. And most people will agree in big change management scenarios, that's not a path they want to be on. So you've got to get that base level of agreement of why would we change. Then there is the concept of, why should you desire it? You understand the intellectual argument to do something different. Why should you desire what we are saying should be done different? And that's a mix of logic and emotion. And so understanding the high touch part that goes with high tech, or the heart that goes with the tech, and the details and the facts and the research, that is the second stage where that's incredibly important. Then it's, let's be honest about what our ability to make this change is. A lot of times people go through this psychological sequence of saying, well, why are we doing it? Okay, we've answered that. Why should I want to do it? Okay, we've answered that. But you know what? We're not able to do that. Okay, let's talk about that. Let's fix it. And then when we get to that, what's the knowledge that we need to make this change? And if you don't have it, let's call that out. I'll get it for you. So these are just very logical sequences of human thinking that we all go through, sometimes very rapidly and subconsciously, sometimes very slowly and consciously. And good leaders that bring people through change recognize these things, and their planning, their thinking, and their communication really addresses that psychological sequence. And then throughout that, you identify what has been called by many of the great consultants a sponsorship spine. You identify every level of the organization and key influencers at every level of the organization, and they are brought in to help shape the thinking and the communication as it cascades. And that ensures, one, fast thinking, because you're one person at the top or in the middle is never going to know exactly how someone's day job or lives will be affected at other parts in the organization or the community. And so progressively expanding inclusion and thoughtfulness about who that is, and make sure stakeholders that are affected or give input for communication and details of a change. One, your change management, your change strategy and tactics are going to be far more successful because they're shaped by the people that will have to execute. And then you're also going to have a little army of ambassadors that will help make sure it's sticky. And that's really basic blocking and tackling, but it takes a lot of work. It's not the fast way.
Well, but that's the way you broke that down, I think will be so helpful for so many people. That's awesome. So I know I just want to ask you two more questions and then we'll wrap. But tell me about a moment when you failed. And I know you are so open and so transparent. But I know people would love to hear that, and how you dealt with that, how you recovered from it, what you learned from it, things like that.
Yeah, I think some of the bigger failures, there are tons of little mini ones all the time. But the bigger one is when I over-indexed on humility, which I mentioned before. I became the president of Cinnabon, and I was 32 years old, and everyone around me in my peer group is, late 40s, mid 50s, early 60s. So I had so much respect for everything they built, et cetera. So a few things started happening where I looked at the situation and said, who am I to question them? So that's the humility coming out. That's the respect for other people. Sure. And I didn't question some things that the president should have questioned, and they evolved into initiatives that ended up being painful for the company to go through and that damaged my reputation pretty early on and hurt some trust that I had built. And then I had to, really step up and say, look, I didn't have the processes in place that I needed to. I didn't ask the questions I should have. And I made really tough decisions along with the company's leadership to fix it and do the right thing and pivot. And the lesson in that is that I had the courage to ask the question, or I had the humility to ask the question, which is, who am I to question them? But the other piece is that I not only asked that question, but I didn't answer it. And so the asking of the question was one step. Who am I? The answer was the president. So the answer is you're the freaking president. And if anybody should be asking questions, you should be. And so that was the miss. And because I didn't answer the question and said another way, I didn't claim the authority my position required. I over-indexed on humility instead of courage and confidence. And so humility without courage and confidence means you're just a student. No one wants to follow just a student. But courage, on the other hand, courage and confidence, when not tampered with humility, you're a bull in a china shop. And yeah, you'll get some things done, but teams won't follow you for very long. So I've got many mistakes I've made, but that's a big one and a big lesson I've carried through since then.
And would you say it was just lack of experience in that moment with things like that caused you to maybe not answer the back end of that question? Was it a bit of a confidence gap in that moment? Why do you think you didn't go deeper?
No, it was, as I said, it's over-indexing on humility. I was more focused on being respectful than I was focused on successfully doing my job.
Sure.
And that, among many other things in my life, has sort of taught me there's a delicate balance to those two things.
Neat. You do a ton of humanitarian work, and I know go to Africa often. How do you integrate? I mean, you've recently been married. You lead an enormous organization. You travel to Africa and give back in amazing ways. How do you integrate everything in your life and avoid burnout?
I think part of it is just having some basic principles. One is don't be too hard on yourself. You're just one person. And so I remind myself of that often. Two, I keep everything in perspective. When you spend time in the toughest parts of the world, you get to see what tough life really looks like. So it just creates a level of calm and peace that maybe I don't experience the same level of stress that some might by packing in the schedule, because I'm just not overly concerned about the things that don't matter.
Right.
And there are very few things that honestly really matter. Right. And when you have that perspective, it just helps keep your heart and your soul calm. And then the other piece is making sure I take time for me. And I have my value stream. The most important thing to me is my family. Unquestionably, number one, everything else is a distant second, third, fourth, fifth. And when you have that clarity in your priorities, decisions that might be stressful really become a little less so, because you remember, even though it's painful to make some trade-offs and compromises that busy schedules and life requires, that's made easier by remembering, but I'm acting in accordance with my values.
Right.
And so keeping that compass, that true north, is really helpful. And then I just try to keep great people around me. My husband and I have a monthly check-in on our anniversary. We do mini check-ins, but we talk about, what's the best and worst from the month? How can I be better for you to be more effective? What's something that's worried you? We really check in. So I spend the energy in my personal relationship that makes sure that I'm showing that's the most important thing. And then with my team, spending time with my team, talking about their career goals and where they want to go. So I try to keep checking in to make sure my behaviors are aligned with my values. And sometimes that means I need to just chill out and say no to a bunch of stuff.
Yep.
And I do that. And I try to do it with grace and gratitude for whatever opportunity I'm saying no to. But the reality is, if I say yes to everything, every dollar people ask me to donate, every speech people ask me to do, every mentoring coffee, I could literally spend, as you could and many of your listeners, 24 hours a day wearing myself out and So getting comfortable with saying no and the why behind when I say no. And sometimes I say no by saying yes. I tell people, no, I can't do this, but I know someone who might, or no, we, can't contribute to your cause, but we might be able to provide some burritos or pretzels or whatever. So just finding the ways to say no and hoping that if you do it with kindness and gratitude, that people will get it. And hopefully come back around if there's a time where the opportunity aligns. So that helps too.
Well, I love what you said, which is so true. I think you've got to be gentle on yourself because we all do, because you're one person. And well, so Kat, I love to end with a really quick rapid fire. So I'm going to just throw out questions to you, and you are so incredibly self-aware. I'm sure you'll be able to fire these back. So I'm going to just throw them at you, throw back kind of what comes to your head and your heart, and then we'll wrap. Does that sound good?
Perfect.
One word to describe yourself.
Curious.
Childhood idol.
My mom.
Your mentor.
Everyone at every moment.
Biggest fear.
Letting people down.
Last book you read.
The Social Animal.
Favorite book.
I know. Man.
I know. I know you read a lot.
I don't have a favorite. I've got a line of leadership books, sort of escape book, but anything that I feel really connects with real human stories, those are typically my favorite books.
Okay. Favorite hobby or sort of off-day activity?
Spending time with my husband.
Favorite place to travel?
Eastern Africa.
Hidden talent?
I can take complex concepts and put them into clear and compelling short phrases.
You know what? I have to agree with that, girl. You do. You do that great. What would you say is your greatest accomplishment?
The people that I've had a chance to work with or mentor or lead, seeing them become leaders.
That's awesome. What's one thing you can't live without?
Love.
What's your biggest pet peeve?
Mean people.
Life motto.
Don't forget where you came from, but don't you dare ever let it solely define.
Nice. What's your morning routine and evening routine? This is more than a bit of a
morning
quick fire.
Morning is water, stretch, time with husband, a little bit of read, work out if I have time, good breakfast, head to work. Evening is calls and emails on my way home from work, a little bit of walk if the weather's nice, yoga if there's classes nearby, and time with friends and family.
What advice would you give your younger self?
Try not to over-index too much on humility, even though it's an admirable trait, and bring forward some of the confidence and courage a little sooner.
Kat Cole, you are the absolute best. It is awesome to have you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, as always, for listening. And if you missed an episode, you can listen to previous episodes on iTunes or on mollyfletcher.com. Until next time, stay curious and be a game changer.